All right, now it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Peter Stevens. Peter has been a member of the Wolli Creek Preservation Society since 1990 and was on its committee from 2001 to 2017, serving variously as President, Vice President, Treasurer, Membership Officer, and Bush Care Coordinator. Welcome, Peter. Are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Would you like to share your screen with us?
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be doing a very quick introduction to a long and varied story. You won't get to see my talking head for very much of the time because I'm going to go straight into a slideshow presentation about, oh, this is all, sorry, this has not been started at the right point. It's always hard when I don't do these things terribly often, so I'm really going to get a sense there's quite a lot to look at. Okay. So we're going to start off with the location and status of the Wolli Valley. And
have you shared your screen, Peter?
Sorry?
I think you have to share your screen.
Oh, did I fail to do that? My apologies.
Yeah, it didn't come up.
And that means I'm going to have to do something weird. Yep, okay, share screen. Okay, here we go. Share. And we go then to...
That's better. And then if you start the slideshow.
Yeah, start the slideshow and then I can disappear.
Okay.
There we go. The dark green area in this aerial shot over Sydney, this is quite an old one now, but this dark green here represents sort of closed canopy vegetation, meets over your head and so on. And there's not very much of it in the Sydney area, from the coast here to way out west, somewhere like Prospect, and so between the fringes of the Parramatta River and the fringes of the George River, there's nothing else as big as this bit in the middle of the screen, which is the Wolli Creek Valley. Wolli Creek with Bardwell Creek is the major tributary of the Cooks River. Their catchments begin in Hurstville and Penshurst, Narwee and Roselands, and the creek flows mostly east to meet the Cooks River at Tempe, so down here. Between Bexley North and Tempe, this is Bexley North back here, the creek flows for over 4 kilometres through bushland in a steep valley. And the Wolli Valley contains extensive bushland, about 50 hectares, much of it of high conservation value. It's associated with one of the few remaining creeks in inner city with banks that have not been extensively engineered or channeled. In combination, they represent a heritage of natural values unique in a wide region from the fringes, as I say, of the Parramatta River to Georges River. And they form a brilliant complement to the playing fields and parklands of the Cooks River. And we'll come back to that a little bit more. This is what it looks like close up, or it would do if my machine would do what it's supposed to do at this point. It's not responding to the keyboard. Okay. The bush area has many different landforms and plant communities and contains an outstanding array of natural environments with sandstone woodland, heathland, mangrove stands, marshland, reed beds, open parkland, and remnant rainforest species, all within a pretty small, compact area. It's home to a wide diversity of flora and fauna, particularly birds and reptiles. What I'm going to do now is to show you a bit of its history in a very short sense, because people, I heard the Wolli Valley sometimes described as pristine, and we know it's nothing like pristine. It's virtually all regrowth, but it's still pretty amazing. Let me show you what that regrowth looks like. Here's what it looked like in 1943. You can see the Earlwood Plateau and the ridges here that run down towards the valley. This is Nanny Goat Hill in this area here. What I want you to look at in particular is the river flat area, this area here. This is Bardwell Creek, by the way, running up here. These areas here, you can see they're pretty much denuded of vegetation. It's all very low growing stuff, not much there at all. By 2016, when this next photograph it comes from, these are both from 6 maps, by the way, if you want to go and look and explore it in more detail yourself. You can see now that these flat areas around the river are in fact quite reasonably well clothed in vegetation now, but we've lost on the southern side, a whole area has gone over to industrial estate. The question is, how was all that survived? Well, let me take you on a brief walk through the valley. We're going to walk down from here to here, but I'm just going to show you a few. We've got hundreds, of course, hundreds of photographs, and it's just a matter of grabbing some that will show you some of the sorts of things you might see if you walk that way. And while those are clicking through, I might tell you a little bit more about how they've survived. How have they survived as well as they have? Whoops, it's still not doing my keyboard. Oh, look, that's not right. Oh, yes, sorry. Oh dear. I'm having terrible trouble with the technology, Carly, because it's not doing all the right things. Okay. The other thing about the valley is it's home to the Two Valley Trail, the Wolli Track section of the Two Valley Trail, which runs from Bexley North down to Tempe. But you can then take up a walk up here and get to Campsie. It's about 13.5 kilometers. You can catch an express bus back from there to Bexley North. So you make a nice round trip for a day walk. Wonderful stuff. And we ask ourselves, how has this amazing bushland, you can see just how amazing it is as we go through here, how has it survived as well as they have, given that history? Their survival at all into the 20th century is quite remarkable, and it stems from a combination of accidents and community action. Oh, you get to see shots on me with short hair when we could still get the hairdressers. Okay, now, I'm not going to be able to spend much time on the history to 1967 because we're quite short of time. And again, it's not. Okay. But we do need to note that the Bidjigal people use the valley extensively. Though most traces of them have been obliterated, except to Aboriginal eyes, they could still see places where they would have been. This is a picture of Pamela, and it's thought that he, the resistance fighter against colonialists, actually made use of the Wolli Valley as an escape route at various times. If you want to see more of that early history that I'm very rapidly skating over, this is probably the best source. It's published by the Society. You can get hold of a copy via the Society's website. We've also published a bibliography that the two authors here, Brian Madden and Leslie Muir, put together while they were working on this, with all the early references in colonial documents and so forth to the Wolli Valley. In colonial times, the valley was used for timber getting, lots of clearing went on, charcoal burning and near subsistence farming in the early days of the colony. Here's a picture. This is actually a bit later. This is around the time of the First World War, when farming was going on at pretty low level. This sort of looks like the beginning of market gardens here, but you can see there was still quite a lot of bushland around, except in other areas they cleared it for paddocks. The creek area also became a place for noxious industries like piggeries, tanneries, tallow factories and wool scouring. And later on, there was extensive market gardening. And here's a picture from the top of Nannygoat Hill, a prominence on the Irwood Ridge, of market gardens. So we're looking down here, what's now Torella Reserve, huge area of market gardens. But you can see the area that's now covered by the industrial estate is also market gardens. And there were market gardens over here to the right and over here to the left. Those are the ones there lasted up until the 1950s. But mostly an increasing hard services with urbanization still going on, of course, has led to more and more flash floods. And these became uneconomic as they got flooded and washed away so often. Also worth noting in the background here that we've got the sewer aqueduct going across Wolli Creek. We'll come back to that later on. Nonetheless, the valley avoided major residential and industrial development, even though a fair bit of land speculation took place, which was ever so in Sydney, because the valley was isolated, narrow and difficult to access. It was also away from the main line avenues of development, which took place broadly along the present lines of the Princes Highway and Canterbury Road, themselves later roughly paralleled by the early Illawarra and Bankstown railway lines, 1884 and 1895. And it was not until the East Hills rail line through the valley opened in 1931 that expansion really got underway. And then it occurred only slowly because of the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II and the inevitable slow recovery from that. Plans to build in what are now bushland areas were established. Why has it done that? You can see here's an area of bushland at Bexley North, and here's another one at Bardwell Park, where the land lots are already marked out and they would have been built on, had not in 1949 the Cumberland Plan, County of Cumberland Plan, been established by the government. And the bush, from then on, the valley's bushland was largely protected by that status as a road reservation, later on the M5 East corridor. But it was protected, but it was also mostly neglected. More recently, and this is where we can start to spend a little bit more time, by about the 1960s, we'd already lost all the market gardens. There was the beginnings of a change in community values. This a little bit later was the era of green bans. And this is a picture of a protest in the Wolli Valley. Took place in 1967, before the Kelly's Bush green ban, which was probably the earliest of the environmental green bans. But these people, dressed in their suburban finery for television, are marching up to Nannygoat Hill to prevent it being demolished. It was planned, there were plans afoot to have it completely reduced to ground level, down to the level of Torella Reserve, taken away to be used for fill on the airport runway. By 1978, reaction against proposals for a freight road, so using that road corridor from Kiama to Chullora, led to a commission of inquiry. Resulted in the 1980 Kirby report, all 4 volumes of it, nicely bound there, and all personally typed by young barrister David Kirby, later Justice Kirby of the New South Wales Supreme Court. But it's a terrific report, and typewriters were still going. It's one of those things we forget these days, computers being so ubiquitous. Well, it recommended that against the road and for the preservation specifically of the Wolli Valley bushland. Great stuff. 1984, in the aftermath of this, 1984, a large number of movements were moving around Sydney, but there was a couple of groups started to try and protect the Wolli Valley. And out of that came in 1984, the birth of the Wolli Creek Preservation Society, which was incorporated in 1987, produced its first update then, number 1, March 1987, and was already raging on about motorway building, trying to stop it happening and seeing a slight victory there. Over the next decade or so, motorway proposals came and went. Whoever was in government was for it. Whoever was in opposition was against it, no matter which party it was, whether you were in government or not. And the Wolli Creek Preservation Society was protesting against it in fairly massive form. This is 1990 in the city, and you can see a very large number of, and at least 2 of the people in this picture I know are still active in the society. One of them is the audience today, and I think we know who that one. I think that's the current vice president. Okay, and this is what we were protesting against. Here is where the motorway was going to go as a 6-lane highway above ground. So it was on stilts a lot of the way, but it went through practically all of what is now the bushland of the Wolli Valley. And it would obviously, in terms of its construction and the subsidiary bits, it would have been much wider than this suggests. In 1993, the Society, with the assistance of Clover Moore, who was then an MP, got into the Parliament a private member's bill to convert the whole of the bushland into a regional park and a national parks and wildlife management. Well, that didn't get anywhere. I think Parliament was prorogued and it lapsed, but it had its effect because in 1998, finally, Tim Moore announced that the motorway was going to go underground, and indeed it did. This is the M5 East Tunnel. It goes through here. And that the bushland would become a regional park. We then began a long struggle to get the regional park actually to exist, because most of it was in other hands. It was very slow. There were over 100 land lots involved within the bounds of the regional park, and they were in many different hands, although they were mostly council and state agencies. In 2004 and 2006, because it was all happening so slowly, we ran major public meetings to try and push the process along. And that didn't get too far, and we had in 2010 to launch a major campaign, which we started with some posters, we ran a petition, we pointed out that 12 years already since the promise was made to create the regional park, 4 times longer than the Harbour Bridge, same time it took me to build the Warragamba Dam, and we asked people to sign the petition. We then got lots and lots of petition signatures, all hard copy those days, and we took that into town on a roll and we rolled it out. We rolled it out in Macquarie Place. Lots of ministers had their offices in this building here, and this is what it was looking like. There's a nice video of that we'll send you a link to in due course. We also emphasized just what it meant, if you were a young child starting primary school back then, 1998, you'd finished your education and you were on your way to your first job by 2010. That's how long it had been. So we're really making a point of that. Well, that was all very well, pushing the completion of the regional park, but then suddenly motorways reared their heads again, and there was, from about 2010 onwards, there was proposals to create an expansion of the M5, another set of lanes to take the expressway through the valley. And that threatened the Bexley North end of the bushland, and we had to turn around and fight that and fight the whole WestConnex project, which you can see we didn't win, but we did win part of this one. Although we had to do a large number of things. In 2012, 2013, 2014, round about National Tree Day, we ran events in that part of the bushland because it wasn't well known, one of the less known parts of the valley. And we did things like have Hug a Tree Day, and lots of people hugging trees with colourful things on them. And we ran some information stalls. We'd installed a fabric stream. We put in some spider webs, all things to kind of illustrate what was afoot. We had people inspired by Wolli coming and doing painting and playing guitar and so forth. And we did some kids' activities, of course, as well. So that was with big efforts, major organisation to run these events. And eventually part of, I guess we were part of a process, fairly significant part, we like to think, of getting this to change. And in the end of 2016, Mike Beard announced that the plans to put the dive site at Bexley North through our bushland had been changed, and it was moved further up the valley. In fact, it was a loss as well, because they then decided to take through a piece of distinct bushland, a unique ecosystem in the general area, and that was wiped out completely, though it was supposed to be protected as part of the aftermath of the first M5. So we lost that completely when we weren't forewarned that it was on the cards at all. In February 2017, having got that good news, we had a bit of a celebration. And we did this on Allura Reserve, and we had a band, and we had food, and we had all sorts of things going on. But we didn't rest on our laurels for terribly long, because at the same time we launched a new campaign, this time to try and get the regional park completed by 2018. You can see we're still keen to see the regional park completed. Well, that brings us up pretty much to the current situation. And the ownership of the land, this shows a period around 2015 when this was prepared, the base map, but I've put on here various indications of what has happened since. But the overall thing is that it's approaching completion. All these lots through here, whatever their ownership was, are either now in the hands of national parks or in the pipeline on the way to them. What's not are some private lots back here and some lots that belong to Sydney Water here. And they're sticking points. The private blocks, we think, are not too difficult to deal with because they're the bits that are needed for the regional park have already been designated as such. They're below a cliff line. The owners can't use the bottom box. So we think that they're no problem, but Sydney Water is. Why is this not happening? So we launched another campaign. Of course, this time we were able to do it by QR code. Things had got modern. We were able to launch another campaign. And that came after a little bit of toing and froing in which we thought things were going to be fairly reasonable. We wrote, soon after that celebration, we wrote to the Minister for Water to request the handover of the Sydney Waterlands for the regional park. That was in June. In August, Sydney Water suddenly announced to local residents that it was going to put an odour control unit in the valley on its land in 2018. Between the end of 2018 and the end of 2019, their plans were made known to the society, but we rejected them. We thought they were bad plans. We accepted that the odour control unit was necessary. We even accepted that it had to be approximately here. The reasons we objected the location that they were proposing for it, which is pictured there, and that's behind it is a lovely rocky outcrop, partly demolished, was that it would knock out a major and important attractive rock face. It would remove some bushland lovingly tended by our bush care volunteers for a fair long time. It would obscure the viewpoints of that sewer aqueduct across the creek. And most particularly, and we'll see this in more detail later, it would disrupt the connectivity of the bushland. And it would prevent a lot of the bushland that was there being incorporated into the regional park. So we followed this up with this. We did lobbying both directly to the minister and other ministers, but also via our local MLAs and the councils and anybody else we could get to put their hand into it. We took a fair number of media releases. We're a small issue. It's hard to get major media interest. There were a couple of Sydney Morning Herald articles have resulted, and the local leader has done a few bits too. And we also looked at legal options. We tried to get an interim heritage order to protect the bushland, and we may still need that time coming on. When the petition had got to 4,000, it's now at 4,780, but when it was at 4,000, we undertook to present it to the minister, who declined to come out and collect it. But we went into town and we did a little bit of street theatre with placards saying 4,000 voices say, put it outside the regional park. And then we turned them over and we said that all these bad things about Sydney Water's exemption from ordinary planning processes, and asked the minister to overrule the decision. And we handed over the 4,000 signatures on a printout, not such a big roll this time, but because they were all single lines now, and presented that to them via the MLAs. Well, we haven't been just saying we're not just being NIMBY. As I said, we accepted the thing. We just wanted a different location. And this is what Sydney Water were proposing. Here we are at the eastern end of the valley, and this is where they wanted to put it. This is their block that we said round the thing. These are the two private blocks. The cliff line runs here, and these blits are out of use for them. This L-shaped block here, Sydney Water wanted to put this pretty centrally in it and retain ownership of the whole block, which would mean that these bits of bushland and that bits of bushland would only meet at a corner, if at all, because actually cliff line runs here. So there'll be no connection between the bushland. It would destroy bushland that we lovingly developed here and do all sorts of other bad things that I said. Well, we put forward a constructive alternative. We said, well, why don't you put it here? And this is what it would look like. And this whole block could then be incorporated to the regional park with all the benefits that that would have of saving the rock face and so on. Now, that's a long story here, and I'm not going to take you through it all because I've spent the past several months of my life immersed in it. But we're still struggling with them. They are, in fact, now reconsidering and reevaluating, and now talking about construction in late 2022. So we've seen a delay of 4 years, and we hope that they will see sense now. But in late 2022, just do a little bit of maths and recognize that that will be 24 years, double the time when we did our campaign in 2010, 24 years since the promise was made to create the regional park. So you can bet your bottom dollar they'll be working on that like mad. And if you're interested at all, there's more places you can go to find out. But I'm going to stop there as far as the history is concerned and tell you a little bit about the society, because gosh, we'd like you to join it. Here is the latest update. You can see we're promoting what we've been doing in the campaign. We also have a website, and if you clicked on this, this tab here, it would take you through to lots of information about the odor control unit, and you'd be very rapidly able to get fairly close to the present on it. We also have a link to the Two Valley Trail map that you saw, and we have a presence on social media of all sorts of kinds. Not a pronounced presence, but we're there. We use our logo in all sorts of ways. The walleye possum is used to protesting and to bushwalking and kayaking, doing a bit of computer work and doing planting, and generally protecting the bushland. And he appears in lots of places for us. Here's a whole list of activities that we have run over time. And you can see they're very varied. They've been very constrained under COVID. We've had to suspend an awful lot of them, but we're still doing what we can. COVID's also brought a major increase, almost a trebling of visitors to the valley, and we're seeing it in danger of being loved to death. We have to, all the paths are widening and people doing things, huge numbers of people going through. But we're also seeing behaviours that breach Wolli Creek Regional Park rules, dogs off lead, bikes being ridden through. We're seeing theft of plants and vandalism, and people creating new tracks through bushland that we want to preserve and restore. So lots happening still, and we'd like you to join the society. You can do that via the website. You can sign the petition for the OCU through that, but we do particularly ask you, when you visit the Wolli Valley, please take care of nature while you're there. It'll take care of you. And thanks for joining the talk. Kylie's going to circulate. I haven't